Wake that ass up.
Early in the morning.
The Breakfast Club.
Morning, everybody. It's DJ MV Angela Yee, Charlamagne the Guy. We are the Breakfast Club. Good morning. Now, last week, Charlamagne and I were doing a story. Angela Yee was out in Saint-Tropez.
Yes.
And Charlamagne and I were confused with different things that we can say, different things that we could talk about when we were talking about transgender. We were talking about a story from Malik Yoba, who's here. And he called me and said, Envy, I want to come and I want to have a conversation. We also reached out to our good brother Damon, who's been up here a couple times.
David Johns.
Mm-hmm. And said, let's have this conversation, a serious conversation where we can ask questions. It's not a joke, where we can learn and understand everything that's going on because we don't know.
Let's have an educated conversation.
An educated conversation,
Yes.
right. So Damon
And we're not
decided to
educated.
Not at all.
No.
Nah, so Damon decided to join us this
David,
morning.
man.
I said Damon?
Yes.
David
God.
John. David decided to join us this morning, and I
Naturally.
appreciate that.
I appreciate that.
So let's get right into it. You brought somebody with you, and Malik, you brought somebody with you as well. So introduce your guest, please.
Yeah, I'll let Brother Yoba go first.
No, I'm gonna let you go first, brother. Sound like a Muslim, brother. Yoba. You want a bean pie, brother?
No, yeah. So for those who don't know, again, appreciate the invitation. I'm David Johns. I lead the National Black Justice Coalition. We are intentional and unapologetic in standing at the intersections of racial equity and LGBTQIA plus and same-gender loving equality. And I want to be clear that when you guys reported this, and when I considered accepting this invitation, I had to acknowledge that this space and conversations had here have been a source of trauma for some members of the community.
Mm-hmm. That's a fact.
For trans folks in particular, right? And the struggle was thinking about the best way to ensure that we take advantage of the opportunity that Brother Yoba has provided to make space to have these conversations.
Correct.
And so I both, before we do anything, want to acknowledge both the trauma as well as y'all leaning into it, listening to it, learning from it, and then making space so that we can heal and do better. Period. Full stop.
I'm all for that.
Right?
Amen. Touch and agree. Should we
With
touch
that
and
in
agree?
mind,
Amen.
Right? And also acknowledging that, I'm a Black, same-gender loving man, but this is a conversation centering the experiences of our trans and non-binary members of our community. I invited Nala Toussaint, who is a member of our Black Trans Advisory Council. She's a healthcare worker, she's a healer, and she's somebody who helps to advocate for ensuring that Black people make space for other Black people. So she joined us today.
Thank you for having me, y'all.
Thank you for coming.
Oh, do I get to introduce
Yes,
now?
sir.
So yeah, I introduced my the impetus actually for a lot of my activity in recent months and weeks is my good friend Carmen Carrera, who some folks know from RuPaul's Drag Race, and she transitioned on television, and she's a hero. She's a superhero, and actually Carmen is the person that inspired me or made me self-reflect as a person who thinks that they live authentically and lives in my truth. I realized that when I hang around my friends who are members of the LGBTQ plus community, they are a lot more authentic than me. They live in their truth, and they live with their truth with a lot of persecution and abuse, sometimes ends in murder. And as a person who has grown up in New York City, went to Julia Richmond High School, Talent Unlimited program, where two kids transitioned. One was Octavia St. Laurent, who ended up in the movie Paris is Burning. I went to school with her, who ended up HIV and drug addicted, and someone who in the later years of her life I really tried to put her on in some shows and stuff I was producing. And so I've carried this burden, as I carried a burden for incarcerated individuals, for kids in poverty, for human beings that are suffering and marginalized. That's just my mission in life, to lift up other people. And so World Pride this past June, I thought I was just supporting Carmen on float. And I've been around the Pride parades around the world, like just as oh wow, look at people celebrating life. And I've always been a little envious, because I'm like, the Pride parade for me has always been like, wow, people are just celebrating life. It's not some mythical figure or some holiday. It's just living.
It's called pride, too, having pride in who you are as a human being.
And who you are. And so this pride, at first I was just drinking the tequila on the float inside. Then at a certain point, I decided to sit on top of the float with Carmen. And it was that moment as we're going down Fifth Avenue, and folks, mostly Black and brown people, are looking at me and looking at Carmen and seeing us sit next to each other. They're drawing whatever conclusions people draw if you sit next to a female. But in that moment, I felt pride. I felt like, oh shit, like, yo, I'm from New York. I've been on Fifth Avenue. I've never felt this feeling of like, you know, and it's not about, it was just a pride for living and a pride for my people and a pride for the strength of the people around me. And so we've been working on a number of things. You mentioned trauma, David, which is very, very real for all of our community. And so Carmen and I have a workshop called Love and Trauma, the Trans Experience, which looks at trauma and love from a political perspective, community perspective, family perspective, interpersonal. And so we've been working on that. We've been working on some book projects, some content projects to tell these stories. And I found out about Trans Visibility March coming up on September 28th. I saw it on Instagram. I hit them up and I said, hey, I want to support. And they said, okay, we appreciate you posting. I said, no, use my name. I want to show up. And they couldn't believe it. They go, why? I said, and I told the story about Carmen. And so I thought that.
This was before you had said that.
Oh, yeah, anything.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
This was like 2 weeks ago.
All right.
So the craziest thing is literally in the space of a week, we offered up the workshop the day before on the 27th in D.C. Because we wanted to bring together the community. This isn't a trans issue, it's a human rights issue. It's a civil rights issue. It's about, you know, it's cisgender people that give birth to trans children, right? And so it is the educators, it's the jobs, the employers. These aren't trans people,
Right.
by and large. And
Is this considered coming out? Because I started to say that just now.
I think
and
it's called
didn't know if
stepping
that was
the
the
fuck
term.
up. I think it's called stepping up. I don't think
I
it's
would
about.
use the term,
I think it's called stepping up because there are a
There's a term
lot
in
of
the middle
black
that we'll come
men,
back to.
and I ain't gonna blow up nobody, but we all know who they are, that are in situations where they are friends, sometimes lovers, sometimes murderers of trans women, and there has been no other cis black man that. And for those that are confused about the language, cis is a term from chemistry that means two things that exist on one side, right? So for someone like myself who is heterosexual, who loves women, but I love people, and I hate to see people suffering. It's really, really basic for me. And so it's not about coming out. It's about stepping up and saying, yo, black man, when people want to shame Mr. C, or they want to shame Eddie Murphy, they want to shame Teddy Pendergrass, they want to shame folk because of their association with folks. I just felt like, who else is going to be willing to put a target on their back?
Now, I don't think Eddie Murphy ever stepped up, though.
No one has. No one has. That's my point.
Oh.
That's my point. And I don't want to be long-winded here because we got a lot of guests, but that was just my point of saying, like, yo, like just this past weekend, Labor Day weekend, 2 young people died. And we aren't talking about it.
I saw you were testing.
I covered you to say murder because oftentimes we say die, but I think we got to say what it is. It's murder. It's not. They didn't. Yeah, they got murdered.
Yes.
Brutally.
Yes.
Right. And so oftentimes we fluff around they die like as if it was like they naturally died.
Well, forgive me. I didn't mean that.
No. You got.
But that's why this space is important. Words matter, right?
Words matter because like it gives context to like what we as a black community get to do to step up.
Now the conversation came because I guess you did an interview and out of the interview it said that you were attracted to transgender.
Transgender
And
women.
you know what? So let me just acknowledge all the faux pas I've made. I've been screwing up left and right? Because I thought, you know, it started with, oh man, here's a young man getting taunted in a video.
Reese Willoughby.
Reese Willoughby,
That was
yes.
really sad.
That was in Philly, right?
Right.
Reese
He's from
Willoughby.
Philly,
Yeah,
right?
he's in Philly, yeah.
And I see this, I'm like, yo, that could have been me at 20 years old. But this kid is like, yeah, fuck that. I like this. I was like, I wasn't saying that at 20. I knew that I had some feelings inside, like, why is it that if I'm with this, or if I meet a woman, because my first experience meeting a trans woman that I was actually attracted to, but you told me I should use, what did you say I should use?
I said we should start transforming the language around attractive because we also have to understand impact versus intent. So when someone hears like a trans woman like myself, I hear fetish.
Right. So which is a trip because I didn't know you were trans, right? So I see you in the lobby.
Because
I
we-
see
right,
I see you
because it
upstairs.
doesn't have a
I'm
look.
like I see you downstairs. I'm like, yo, that's a beautiful woman. That's what I thought. And so when you told me you were trans, I leaned in to learn. Right? And that's what it is. It's like, so my first experience, I was 16 years old in the club. I meet a woman named Carmen Extravaganza. I had no idea who she was. I just saw this fine Puerto Rican chick in the corner. And we start talking, and she opens her mouth. I was like, wow. And I leaned in. I was like, who are you? Where are you from? And that was the beginning as a 16-year-old. You go, what the hell does that make me? And there was no language. Who do I talk to? Because you talk to your boys, they're going to clown you.
Right.
You're like, yo, what do you mean? I'm like, no, but this is a human being. Like, she said some really interesting things. And I mean, I hope Carmen speaks up, because this woman here is like a unicorn that has been schooling me left and right. Malik, don't say that. Don't do that. Like little things. Like, for instance,
Also, be yourself. Also, it's
just point the mic. Yeah, just point the mic. I know you guys are sharing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that introduction. No.
First of all, your nails are fire, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I
Always.
just walked the fashion show yesterday for Chromat.
Like drip.
Yeah, I think that for me, I've dealt with a lot of men that are just too afraid. They don't have the language. They don't, they're quick to, I guess, pass judgment on other men or on trans women, but they're not able to stand up and say, like, yeah, this is what I like. And I'm still popping, and I'm still, like for me, I grew up in Jersey. Like, I love hip hop music. I feel like I am just like everybody else in my generation. And then to feel excluded all of a sudden at one point in my life when I'm being my 100% authentic self is just wild to me. And then the men that are attracted to us that keep us as a secret and are hella abusive, it's a shame, and we all need love. So when I met Malik, I knew his trans attraction existed. I've heard, stories or whatever, but I wanted to see for myself, and I wanted to see where his mind was at, and I wanted to see where his intentions were being at a pride parade, and I wanted to make a friend. And I wanted to see really like how does his mind work, and why hasn't he come out earlier?
Stepped up.
Yeah, stepped up. I'm sorry.
Can I offer up a
Yeah,
term?
please.
I want to offer up a term. We've talked a little bit about this before. Well, the term we should be using is inviting in. The thing that coming out does, it is a white people thing. It acknowledges that white people get to come out, move to neighborhoods. We've talked about this before. Hollywood, California, Chelsea, New York, Boys Town, Chicago. They then get to draw power from being gay. Most Black and Latinx, Black and brown, LGBTQIA folks live with other Black and brown people, right? In Brooklyn around the Juice Bar.
Right.
Most of us are concentrated in the South, in states where it is legal to discriminate against us based on actual or perceived sexual identity, gender orientation, or gender expression. It is not safe for Black trans folks to come out in the way that is otherwise popularly celebrated in most instances. That's why most pride events over June are white.
And it was started by
that's why most pride stages, the people at the microphone are gay white men.
Right.
In spite of the reality, this is where Malik is going, that there would not be a pride anything, there would not have been a Stonewall resistance without Marsha P. Johnson, a Black trans woman, and Sylvia Rivera, a Latinx trans woman, who also then founded a political movement that led to what we just celebrated more recently in terms of civil unions for white folks, while Black folks still can't get jobs or housing and are dying. And so the thing that we have to appreciate is that so much of this is about language. When we say, when did you come out? It would work if straight people had to offer up a similar response. But it's usually straight people with their arms folded asking, when did you realize you were weird? Right? And then queer people have to offer up some story that's usually laden with trauma. Right? And then sometimes that's disrupted. Jason and Nadir have a show called Style in Hollywood where they say, we didn't have that trauma. We were supported and loved. Right? That narrative is never offered up. Right? But when you shift it to inviting in, then y'all got to do the work.
Let me ask you a question.
Y'all got to find a
What is the
language and be
proper term
competent.
when you speak, because as a kid, we were talking about this the other day. As a kid, the term was, let's say, for somebody mentally retarded, that would be the term. But now they're saying you can't use retarded.
Right.
Even for, as a kid, when you would say somebody's small, it'd be a midget. But now it's not the term. So when we refer, is it trans woman? Is it transgender? Like, what is the term that we can use that's not offensive?
And that's the important piece about relationship building, because everyone identifies differently within the community, right? You have some folks who will say transgender woman. You have some folks who will say women of trans experience because that's how they feel. And then also you have like when you had Janet Mock, she says some folks reclaim the term tranny. So, like, I know for damn sure you ain't going to call me that, right? Because I don't feel affirmed by that. But for some folks, they take power in that, and we shouldn't take that from them. There's also this term non-binary, right? So we know cisgender is a part of the binary construct. And if y'all don't know what that means, there's Google,
please break it down. Well, I was going to
Malik mentioned the term earlier. So we acknowledge that gender is assigned at birth. People assume that they are male or female, right? And that naturally God says you're going to be this, that, or the other. But the realistic thing that happens is that when babies are born, my sister just delivered twins. Shout out to them, Jackson Jet. When when babies are born, the
Okay.
doctor assigns birth. They pull out instruments, they make educated guesses, right? Like, and sometimes while babies are in utero, this changes. There are times where a doctor cannot actually make an assignment. And those people are called intersex. To your point, it used to be the term that that people used to call hermaphrodites, right? And so if you identify with the gender that you were assigned at birth, you're cis.
Right.
And to Malik's point, scientifically, it means you're on the same side. If you do not agree because a doctor made a decision based on whatever that doctor was doing at that time, that is how you identify yourself, how you make sense of your sexual identity, gender rotation, or expression, you are trans.
Or
and there is a
non-binary.
spectrum, right, of what it means to be trans. Too often, this conversation devolves back into people thinking about whether or not somebody has a penis.
That's right.
It don't have shit to do with that, which is why I appreciated Malik talking about and using the word attraction. I'm a black, same gender loving man. I love men, but I have trans attraction. I know bad black women, cis and trans. And some of this is just about using language to make
do you
space
find
for
yourself
people.
attracted to cisgender women as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we all do it, right? In the same way that
no,
brothers
but I
like,
think
who would
this-
you get a
but-
pass on?
but
If
here's the
Jada
thing
Pinkett
about-
walked in here, it's on.
Here's the thing about language. I think that
I
What do you
said
mean?
if Jada Pinkett
Oh,
walked in
you
here,
mean
it's on.
okay. I'm confused.
He asked about sex attraction. You got to come
Well,
on.
because
Sean,
you
come
got
on.
catch up.
I'm
Catch
sorry,
up.
I got you.
Catching up.
This is because
I got you.
we're trying
I got you.
to clarify language. You know, what's interesting is that I grew up with a name like Yoba. I grew up as a Muslim, right? And so I remember going to school, and I wore a kufiya, and I was told to take it off because there were no hats allowed in school. And so even though the principal knew that I was Muslim, they still insisted upon me being something other than what I was to comfort them.
Right.
And my father was not having it. Yoba means last of the slaves, a new generation. We move through this world with a confidence and, a way of being that says, I don't care what the rest of the world is saying. It's like Nipsey said, I'm doing this. I'm saying, they saying that, I'm saying this. And this is my truth, right? So whether I'm Yoba, this is who I am. And the same thing, I think, happens with language around this issue. I make a post, and people think it is their responsibility to call me gay. Which I understand.
Which there's nothing wrong with.
I agree.
Right.
I agree.
But that's not
But
what
it
was.
isn't me.
What do
right?
you consider yourself?
What do you
said
consider
heterosexual.
yourself?
He's a cisgender man.
No, I asked him what he considers
I
himself.
guess straight based off.
You guess? So
Yeah.
there's a gray area there.
No.
What is
You just said yes.
You
You
guess.
guess.
a great
Yes.
You guess.
I guess
You
I'm
just
straight.
but,
straight.
But here's the thing. So let's
Go back to you don't know what you know until you know it.
It might be another
Yeah.
word for it.
No,
I don't know.
but here, let me help you out.
Heterosexual.
So some of
There
my favorite
Cis.
new people in my life are trans men, right? Teak Milan, who you guys probably know.
Yeah, I had him on my show
Teak
back
is
in the
also
day.
a member of our advisory
Okay,
council.
Teak.
I had him on
Teak
Uncommon Sense
tomorrow.
back in the day.
You know, the dudes from Black Trans TV, Sir Love,
Yes.
and Sir
Yeah.
Knight, and
Knight,
Love
yeah.
More.
Knight,
Like,
yeah.
I've been watching these dudes, like feeling like, wow, these are black men. These are black men that have no fellowshipping with other cisgender black men. So I made it a point to reach out to these brothers and say, I want to be friends with you. I want to meet you. Let's sit down and have lunch or coffee, whatever. So I was with Teak about 2 weeks ago, and Teak says, I identify as a queer man. And I'm like, word? Well, yeah, queer for me is, I'm part of the community forever. And, he's saying that it's more of a cultural thing for him. I was like, wow. So, and he only dates heterosexual women, right? Is that the right term?
Yes.
Did I get it right? Okay, thank you. So I said to him, well, I identify as a heterosexual male. I love women. I don't want to, it's not about bragging, but I've made a point in my life to really live a well-examined life, and through all my dating of women, I've always really studied what is it about this journey of loving a woman, right? My parents were separated at 10, when I was 10 years old. I didn't learn how to love a woman based on my father. I had to learn it through experience, right? And so I've been very, very thoughtful about what does it mean, to love a woman. And so I've always identified as heterosexual male. And so when Teak said he identifies as a queer male, I said, so does that mean if we both love heterosexual women, does that mean I need to expand my definition of heterosexuality? or do I take on this new term? And so I'm not comfortable taking on a term of queer because I don't think there's anything queer about me. I live in a world.
It could be a political stance.
It's a political
It could
stance.
be a political stance as well.
So I consider myself a heterosexual male that loves women, period, end of story. I am not attracted to the male aesthetic. I am not attracted to men. And so that's where it gets very, very nuanced, I guess is the word, right?
No,
And
but not really. Just period, full stop.
Yeah.
What's that?
Period,
full stop. Sometimes we make these things overcomplicated, right? Like, I like strawberry ice cream. I know I don't like chocolate ice cream. I know I really like strawberry, not chocolate, because I've tried both, right? Like, what you're saying is I am a cisgendered, identify with the gender that a doctor assigned, heterosexual, I love women. Man, the comma is because we live in a world where trans people are racist, cis and trans. You are a black man who loves women of color, cis and trans.
Right.
Period, full stop.
Can I ask a question? How do you determine between a fetish and an attraction? Because I'm sure there's people who have fetishes also, and I'm sure that has to be a whole nother category in life.
I can't speak to that.
So when I was talking about earlier about intent versus impact, right? So fetish comes as like when you only want to be with that person in the dark. You only want to be with that person sexually. You fetishizing them, right? Rather than being intentional and actually saying, who are you?
Right.
How can I get to know you? What are your ways of being? And so oftentimes, because, and I hate to say it, but it's facts, is that, you know, our community has this rhetoric that creates stigma for particularly men, particularly black men, who can't feel free enough to be able to their authentic self, to love inclusively, to love freely. And so what then end up happening is that stigma promotes that fetishization, right? So I can't be seen with you because the hood gonna clown on me.
That's right. Or you were friends with Elin Nettles.
Right.
Right?
You know what I'm
The hood
saying?
didn't just crown, they killed her.
Yeah, we've
They
seen. Yeah,
They killed her.
Terrible.
I
We
see you
have to be
shaking
clear
your head
that
a lot,
black
Carmen.
trans women. Oh, go for
What
it,
were you
Carmen.
saying? What were you thinking? You
I'm
not
just
say-
listening.
Oh, no.
Because I mean, I
To the mic.
I want to know, like, okay, so for me, it doesn't make a man any different if, you know, he's heterosexual and he loves women and he's attracted to trans women. He's still the same person. I still see him as no different than any other man that loves women.
Now, is
You know?
is there a difference when it fully transitions? Let's say is that a different name that you call opposed to somebody? For instance,
I don't understand your question. You said fully
I'm
transition.
trying to say. I'm just going to ask
I-
a question. So when you're a man and you transition to a woman, right?
If she still had a
So
penis.
this is problematic.
Yeah.
That is problematic because, again, transness has so little to do with otherwise male determined genitalia.
Right.
We
That's what I'm
gotta
talking
get
about,
we gotta get beyond being fascinated with people's dicks. Period. That's not what this is about. This conversation is about people's spirits,
Right.
making space for people and how they show up. It ain't got shit to do with what they got between their legs.
And also, too, it's like I want to live in a safe place. If I want to go to Pergola or somewhere, you know, and I meet somebody, I don't want to be scared for my life. I should be able to say, hey, I'm trans at the bar and not think any less of me, you know? Like, that's really what I feel like my place in this conversation, because I've met so many men, like, just dating throughout the years, and it's just annoying. And they can literally have the most love for you and want to marry you and take you away and all this, but they will deny themselves and they will put so much pressure on themselves, which just causes a wedge.
Well, because
Can I ask
we've
Carmen and
had-
Nala a question? Nala, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And amongst men, like whenever we see these transgender, you know, women getting killed, like one thing that guys always say is like, oh, she must have slept with somebody and not told them. And I don't know if I agree with that, but what do you say to that?
Oftentimes, I feel like that is the rhetoric within our community that there's a conversation about deception, because what you're saying is that
Yes.
someone didn't say,
Yes.
right?
deceiving, right?
Right. Deception does not give anyone a pass for murder,
At
right?
all.
At all, right? And so oftentimes, and I'm gonna keep it real, I don't have to deceive anyone for them to come into my bedroom. Get what I'm saying? Folks will willingly give their numbers. So I also want that to be clear. So I feel like it's a false narrative, right? That to soften the blunt, right? To justify that this person got murdered because they were deceiving. When we have to understand relationship and relationship building takes time before you disclose anything, right? It's about trust, right? So I feel like it's equally about having a conversation with your partner, whoever you're going to engage
But
with.
I think the bigger conversation and why I chose people are very confused. Like, why all of a sudden this Negro just going to drop this in the middle of us for no reason? There was a reason. There's a march coming up on September 28th. And I was very intentional of posting something that would be followed up with a number of posts with Carmen and I and the other members who are going to be at the march. And this thing's going to roll out over the course of a month. We got distracted with some nonsense. And so the goal was to stay on the mission. The other mission is to create the space for men. And I can tell you, I've never had 15,000 people join my Instagram in like a matter of a couple of days, ever.
Right.
Ever. I woke up Monday morning like, what the hell just happened? I didn't realize that, my post was then picked up by black media, black social media, and spread it around they put some salt on it. People put some dirt on my name, which I was expecting, not specifics. I was expecting people to take exception to how is this super Negro that has been our hero since the 90s, who was the first black man in the history of television to be in a dramatic series representing the hood the way that I did, proudly, on purpose, with intention. Everything I do in my life is with intention. I was here 2 weeks ago, talking about real estate. Why am I intentional about real estate? Part of that is housing, right? One of my favorite projects that I have an opportunity to participate is creating the first LGBTQ plus youth center in New York City for kids of color that does not exist. That's a boss move to say, fuck what everybody else is doing. These kids should not be homeless. They should not be in the streets. We're going to provide housing for them. I'm going to learn the real estate game to provide housing for formerly incarcerated people, for people who can't afford to live in the city. We talked about this. Where are we getting to the fund so that people can put their money in and have a piece of the city that they own, right? The other thing is black men out here who are loving trans women, who are afraid to stand up and talk. Yeah. I am your guy, okay? I can't tell you, I've never had thousands of Instagram fucking DMs from all over the world. Russia, Philippines, Brazil, London, Canada. Famous dudes hit me up. Yo, Malik, I don't know how you did it, bro. I don't know how you did it, but please. So back in the day, where I would have to go to find out about the trans community was to the balls. If you ever watch Pose, that whole culture, that was Harlem, 129th Street, between 7th and 8th, 6th and 7th. I was 19 years old when I went to my first.
What you call it?
A black space.
It's a black space.
I just, again, this is grounded in blackness. This is not some unblack stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And I went at 19 years old with 2 cis women I grew up with. I didn't know. I was like, oh shit, this is like a football game and a fashion show. I didn't know what the hell was going on. All I knew is there was some beautiful women in there, and I was like, ooh, what's that? Right? So that was like early exposure. Or you would go to these clubs that they had around New York City, and it would be like one dude in the corner by himself over here, another guy over there, another guy over here, and the girls would be running around. And I would just lean in like, yo, I'm just trying to learn who you are. There was no place to do that.
Do you feel like a show like Pose has been beneficial?
Yo, right, without question. Not only that, because some of those girls were sex workers, and now they have legit lives as actors, and they get a chance.
Which is also a complicated thing, right? Because sometimes sex work is done by choice, sometimes it's done because you don't have a choice, right? And we need to talk more.
So in your experience, because
what not looking like a choice is connected to resource, as you were just saying. The fact, right? Because we're at a point where like we have to pray, and I'm not saying we have to, but there's appraisal from some folks for him having to come out. There's appraisal for a black
stepped up,
right?
Invite people in.
See, invite people in.
Yep.
Right, and then for him to also support LGBT, we shouldn't have to do that, right? We shouldn't have to be at a place of praising folks for doing what's right for people,
for other people of color,
for other people, especially black siblings. Because this is a conversation about siblinghood, right? And so, for example, it's not just
apologize to my siblings,
right?
There you go.
And it's not even just about a black brother saying they're attracted. We also have, like you said, cisgender people make trans and non-binary babies. So what that also means that we need parents. We also need parents. We also need fathers having conversations. And when we're having this conversation with trans women, we have an assumption, because we end up conflating gender identity with sexual orientation,
And
right?
expression.
And we got to be clear that not all trans women date men.
That's what some trans women date women.
I would like to hear from all of y'all on this because I want to know what's wrong with me not caring. Meaning, like, I don't care what you identify as. I don't care who you sleep with. Like, I don't have a problem with it. Like, you're a human being.
And that's the piece. When you say you don't, the intention versus impact, when you say I don't care, it's almost like when I hate to say it, when white people be like, I don't see race.
Right.
And it's like, is the impact, it's like, you don't see
have to
race.
support.
Like, I know,
Well, not
if
only
you can
that, but
tell
you
what
need to
kind of breed
acknowledge
a
your
dog is, you
privilege.
can, you get what I'm saying, if you could tell what a breed, white people can tell what all the breeds of a dog is, how you not gonna care about race? So it's when you say you don't care, that's mean like you are like erasing my existence.
And
Right.
at the same time,
It's affected
and
so many
failing to
people's
acknowledge
lives.
that you have the privilege of not giving a fuck.
Right.
Because you get to show up in spaces where the assumptions people make about you and how you think of yourself and show up in the world are aligned with what they read you as.
Right.
When for you there are inconsistencies, you spend your entire life feeling like and being told that you need to shrink, hide, neglect, or apologize for critical parts about who you are. That's what I felt like y'all missed when Lil Nas X said, I did this at a point in my life where I knew the risk.
Right.
And I understood the importance of making space for other folks like Nigel Shelby so that they don't feel like they're the only one struggling with this. We've had this conversation in the space before that it cannot be the case that Malik Yoba is the only celebrity we know who is trans attracted. Just like it cannot be the case that Magic Johnson is the only celebrity we know living with HIV. We got to get over not wanting to talk about this stuff.
That's
and
right.
the other part of it is you asked about whether or not like people are being duplicitous. There's so many people I know who show up and love trans women. They just don't feel like they have the space because of the shame and the stigma.
Right.
You
But
just
know
said-
what, but you see what I was gonna say is like I care, and I'm gonna tell you the reason why I care. It's like when I move into my neighborhood, right? White people all over the neighborhood, right? They already have this preconceived notion about who I am because I came from where I came from, and then when they have a conversation with me, it changes. But the thing is, it's like we got to be able to have that conversation and not be like, "Well, I didn't like the way you said that," because honestly, from myself and I'm no Charlamagne, is we don't know. That's why I was like,
Well, nobody
Conversation is important,
It's
but I don't
very
feel like
important.
nobody should have to explain
I
themselves.
agree. And so
No,
let me say this though, because I feel like what gets missed in you saying I don't care is that it is not a barrier for you. You see
Yes.
people for who
Right,
they
you
are.
lose- you don't-
engage with it is not the thing that you would otherwise use to dismiss somebody or discount them.
Absolutely.
Say that.
Yes.
But the reality is
Don't
we
say I
can
don't
have this
care.
conversation. People could listen to this. They can watch the video. They can go online. They'll still be like, yo, fuck you, faggot.
Right, they will.
And so we know we're not doing this for them.
Right.
We're doing this for one of the people that reached out, a friend of mine. Actually, I used to date her, Dominican chick from uptown. I haven't seen her in about 7 years. She hit me on the gram with a picture of her daughter, who's less than 10. It used to be her son. And I was blown.
Who was assigned male at birth?
He was
She
signed male
never
at birth,
her
and
son.
I'm like, wow. She's like, yo, Malik, all I know is thank you very much for your post. Tristan is now Evangelina and living her best life. And she sent a picture, and I was like, incredible. Those stories over and over and over. And I'm in the storytelling business, so you know what my next job is. You know what I'm doing. We are getting busy right now, raising money right now to tell these stories because it's important. And so for me, I have to come into the space to bring what I bring. And when I think about just this love and trauma workshop, like this is a part of it. The conversation is part of it. But what happens when we add music? What happens when we add poetry? What happens when we add meditation? What happens when we add really intentional activities to lighten the load for people? Because people are going to be coming down to ZC with all of this trauma. Years and years and years of the world saying you do not matter. And then here I come, and I know I can't do it alone, which is why last week was a very tough week for me for many reasons. But why in the middle of the storm, I'm actively and intentionally reaching out to healthcare professionals, for artists, for the people like I mentioned, Teak Milan, Sir Knight, those folks saying, listen, the world is screaming a bunch of nonsense right now, but we got a mission. And on this date, this moment starts a movement. I know a lot of y'all been doing your work, but I haven't seen the cisgender men step up and say, this is for us as we lean into this conversation with this whole other group of people. I know right now there's people in my DMs right now like, yo, brother, you did it again. Thank you very much. And guess what? I respond to every single person that took the time to reach out because it is that critical to me. You know, we got work to do, period. And hopefully we can have these conversations without people attacking each other, without putting each other down because we don't understand this. And
it's another thing we don't understand.
The black and
Well,
brown
we should
people.
expect that. We should expect it, but it's also then the responsibility of brothers, cis and trans, queer and otherwise, to stand up and be disruptive.
And the family members.
It's our responsibility.
Right. So
to do
my
that.
boy,
It's
I
y'all's
want to give a shout out.
responsibility
I just had this conversation on the way over
I'll be
here.
honest with you, y'all
K-Bane.
acting like real men right now, and not letting the women talk. I just want you to know
Yeah,
that.
No,
I
I
was
got
like,
questions
I'm
for
like trying to
Carmen.
Angela. I was like,
I'm gonna throw that out there.
We're gonna
All right.
jump in.
I'm like, Angela, you see this? You see this?
Like, I have a lot to say too.
Like, they doing a lot of talking about the experience. They don't got the.
They're actually living the experience.
I was talking about Mel's our responsibility as a complex.
Only
Can I give a shout out? I just got to give a shout out to my homie, K-Bane, who runs Cure Violence out of Queensbridge Projects. And I were just having this conversation this morning. Now, Kay is my little brother. Kay is, you know, him and his brothers, I adopted them, quote unquote, about 23 years ago. They were a musical group. I saw the talent. You know, he was a street dude doing this thing. And I was like, yo, you got gifts, kid. And so he's been my little brother for 20-something years, and he's gone on to get his master's degree, work in city government. He's doing amazing work. He called me last week, said, Malik, I've been in your life for 20-something years. Please help me understand. I feel like I should have known something. I'm like, you've met trans women. I just haven't introduced them as that.
Right.
You know this hairdresser you met? You know this actor? They were trans. You just, why am I going to blow up their spot just to, and let me finish this.
I got you.
So what Kay said to me,
Just
which
like a
I
man.
thought,
I know.
Just like a fucking man.
Listen, hold on, because this part is critical. His staff is 80% formerly incarcerated individuals, dudes that have done 20 plus years. He got 20 text messages last week on my account because of what I posted. People asked him all kinds of questions. So what Kay did, he took the articles that he could find and had them read the articles out loud and process what it meant to them and what it felt like to them. And they're like, yo, man, why you have us doing this bullshit? He said, if I'm going to be a leader in this organization and step into 2020, we cannot do the work around talking about curing violence and healing our community unless we have this conversation. And I just say that as an anecdote to encourage people who are in confused, antagonistic spaces, like, I ain't trying to have this conversation. Please do yourself a favor and sit with some folks and discuss how you feel and get to the root of why you feel that way. Because this is our inheritance. Whether we talk about the real estate, whether we're talking about poverty, whether we're talking about education, whether we're talking about healthcare, check a box. Black folks got all this trauma. So we as the younger folks who have been born in this time without all the information, please just encourage each other to lean in, to listen, to ask questions versus statements, which is so important in every relationship, so that we can learn more and just simply lift each other up.
I have a question for Carmen. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I just want to add to what you're saying. For example, when we talk about trauma, we also have to understand the intersectional identities. Like, so I'm not just black, right? So I am confronted with racial oppression. And then when I get in spaces where I invite folks to my authentic truth as a woman of trans experience, I'm confronted with another set of oppression, right? And so those happen to be trauma because also is a conversation around access, right? What it looks like to go to the doctor, what it looks like to sign a lease for an apartment, what it looks like to be at a job. So oftentimes that narrative about coming out, right, there's oftentimes we constantly as LGBTQ folks have to invite folks in, right? For example, just locker room talk, right? God comes in like, yeah, I like X, Y, and Z, right? Assuming that this person that they're next to is a cisgender heterosexual folk. But what if that person that's not their experience? You already in your ways of being excluded their existence by assumption, assuming that every person that you encounter is straight.
Right.
Every person that you encounter is cisgender. And so what we're having a conversation about is like really switching language intentionally.
Carmen and Nala, because Malik mentioned 10 years old. And another thing that we discussed is like, is that too young to make that kind of decision?
But again, you got to remember the decision is made for us. As Brother David was saying, is that the assumption about who you are is assigned to you by the doctors, right? Off your genitalia. So
But you know who
to the
you
extent
are.
that one can.
right.
That's what it is. And that's why, because we did have a whole conversation about this, and you identify with what you identify as.
At the point at which you are able to do so. So
Yeah.
some of this is, so to be clear, what the science says developmentally is that kids as young as 5 years of age, I taught kindergarten, it happens around that age, are starting to make sense of who they are in the world around them. It could be the case, however, if you don't live in New York, where you don't have access to the spaces that Malik talked about, organizations that exist when you have resource-rich opportunities, you live in rural America where people think black people and black queer people don't exist, you might not encounter somebody of trans experience. That's why a show like Pose is so important, because it shifts you having to be able to literally engage somebody in a discussion like this.
And you take folks seriously.
Right?
So to people
Yeah.
So what about
that- people
y'all?
out
When
there
did
that-
y'all? When did y'all? I don't know. Like I'm don't want to use the wrong language.
Tell
but
me,
when did
why.
y'all-
Let me
when
ask,
did-
why is
you
this important
curious?
for you? Yeah, why is this
Why
important
you
for
gotta
you?
know the when and the
Why is it
Why
important
is
for
that
you?
important?
And
Only because of the youth aspect to it. You know what I'm saying? Like only because when you see young, kids identifying as different genders, I'm wondering if they really feel that way or now they have the choices.
when did you
to
know
make
you
those.
were what you are?
What did you know you were black?
No.
Black?
Don't do the
Gotcha.
black.
That's
No,
cisgender
when did you
now.
know that you are who you are?
I don't know. It's a good question.
Why do you expect us to be able to offer up a similar story?
I never
You don't
thought
know and
about
haven't
it.
So this is
Yeah.
again the problem that we're talking about, right? Like these assumptions, and we play these things out without thinking through the impact, right? Like that process is intimate. It can run time. I have been in relationships with women before I identified as a same gender loving black man. It's not only complicated as fuck, it's not something that people should be expected to regurgitate on command, especially when you can't do it.
Right.
So why? So
But when
why?
you know,
why?
you know.
You don't
Like,
know
when
what
you
you
know,
As
you
you know, right? Because that's what
True.
you're ultimately going to say. I just know. And so we have to trust that right now, kids, the vast majority of kids in public schools are racial ethnic minority students. The vast majority of kids in high schools identify as anything other than strictly heterosexual. They're not saying they're gay. They're just saying that the ways that y'all's brains are working, because y'all been wired that way, don't work.
It's the way that we've been wired, because as we have always been taught and always looked at it, if you have a penis, you're a male. If you have a vagina, you're a woman. If you have a penis, you go to the men's bathroom. If you have and there's people
Or
that
if you're
feel that
black,
way.
you're guilty.
If you're exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
no,
Shit.
these
that's
are
the truth.
no, but
Play it all the way out.
Play
Play it all the way out.
Look, if
Play
you
it
play,
all the
if
way
you
out.
play that out, if you wear your if you wear your clothes a certain way, people be like, oh, that person likes hip hop.
Yeah, true.
That
That's
person's
the
into
truth.
rap. That like we do this as a society, and I think that what we're asking of ourselves and each other is to elevate our consciousness by one. I think the question is fair, even if it's a difficult one to answer. It is fair because that's one of the first things I would ask a trans woman. I'd be like, yo, because I wanted to know, like, because the thing is, if you find yourself language, Nyla says maybe use the word like trans amorous or because
No,
love
I
or
said
love.
that-
You said,
I said it mean the same shit. Like.
but
it
you
mean
also said, but amorous or love communicates
changing trans
empathy.
attracted to love, because love invites folks to really contextualize compassion, empathy, building, trust. When you're saying attracted, the impact that is being heard is that you're only acknowledging my physique.
It's close to the conversation we started earlier about whether or not people are being deceptive and duplicitous. But I just
Right.
want to say this. This is hard stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a
Right,
great
which is why
conversation.
you have
This is
to
great.
ask these questions, right? But so much about this is appreciating that at a point in time we needed to make these assumptions when we didn't have the ability to sit and community with people and build relationships. It was fight or flight. You were encountering somebody, you had to figure this out. Physiologically, the thing that we are wired to think about first is gender. Right? And women, again, thinking about privilege and oppression, often have to think about gender because they then have to think about ways to protect themselves. The way that you then take the next step thereafter is different if you are a person of color, if you are small, if you are trans in a certain way. So some of this is natural. It's reflective. I'm not trying to beat up on somebody or anybody who's struggling with this, listening or watching. That's a natural feeling. What we are asking is that we do a better job of asking why. Why do teachers have boys line up on one side and girls line up on the other without acknowledging that there are babies who don't fit comfortably into either of those categories, and you can ask them to solve a math problem? Right?
So-
Why
so-
do we ask boys to go into one bathroom and girls to go in another publicly when y'all bathrooms at homes are inclusive bathrooms? They are trans
So
bathrooms.
what do we advise? That's what I was saying. Like you said that. Like, there's a boys line and a girls
That could be a
line.
money
Stop
thing too.
doing
though.
it.
That could
Stop
be a
doing
money
it.
thing too.
I'm
though.
an educator, and we say to teachers, don't do things that don't make sense.
Yeah.
That could be a money thing too, though. Dave.
What's the money
The
thing?
bathrooms at the house, because I might just can only afford one.
Oh,
bathroom.
Jesus.
No, I'm being
But I'm
honest.
saying, but it is. But that bathroom is a trans bathroom.
I'm serious. I don't want my kids in my bathroom.
Your
They got
daughter
their-
use your bathroom?
That's
I
not what
don't
we're
like
talking
them
about.
to
What
do
we're
that.
talking about is the fact that
Stay
there are
here.
people
Stay with us. Stay
policing
with us. Stay
people's
with us.
bodies based on what bathroom they can go into. And what I said to my mother when she didn't understand it, because she again heard the fear. The lies that people tell if you let the world explain who we are and how we show up. She said, I don't want a trans man in the bathroom with my niece. Without, again, acknowledging that people who are most likely to perpetrate crimes against children know them, right? And the reality is that every bathroom that she experiences that's not in a public space is an inclusive bathroom.
No, I'm confused. I thought a trans man was like,
As a
Teak.
woman, Teak is a trans man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so why wouldn't you want a trans man in the bathroom?
Because
with your niece?
people are still because
People think that trans men are pedophiles in the same way that people think that men who teach kindergarten are pedophiles, right? Like people make silly assumptions because we don't have
and
time to
run
have
with
these
them
conversations.
and run. So two things, if I can, we talk about
Nope,
men.
let the women talk.
Okay, yes, sir.
What was the question?
No, but I just want to
Right.
say about men and where we are. Like, I was in the barber shop the other day, and my barber's, telling me what his experience was like last week because he's my barber. So people come to him with a lot of questions, and I said, funny thing is we come in the barber shop, and for men, we will often talk about sex, right? Yo, man, you saw her, you getting it, but we don't talk about sexuality. We don't talk about the nuance in sexuality. And so I think that's a great place for us to start because just from a statistical standpoint, if you got 5 or 10 men in a room, percentage-wise, somebody's questioning their identity. Somebody's questioning their sexuality. But we don't create those safe spaces for men to do
goes
that.
We
back
should
to
all
that. It
question.
goes
How
back
do you
to
know
that.
unless you question? We should all
Right.
question.
It
Again,
goes
like
back to that
the way
locker
that we
room
even think
talk.
about that
David,
is
you're
often
cutting off a
negative.
woman.
Yeah, thank you. It goes back to that locker room talk that I was talking about earlier, is that when you have those conversations, you're making assumption around social contact that everyone in the room is straight.
Right.
And so that makes it hard for them to invite you to their being,
That's
their
privilege.
lived
Yeah.
experience. And so that's why when you say you don't care, what that does, right? For example, I'm going to kind of shift the conversation just a little bit. For example, Bailey Reeves. I hope I'm saying her name right.
Who's that?
Reeves, 17-year-old from
Oh, that
Baltimore,
died.
right?
I'm
No.
sorry, that got killed.
Right, because
That killed him.
there's
My
a
bad.
Was
cognitive
murdered.
dissonance about us
Yeah,
saying
that
died, but
got
by
killed.
calling
That
it
got
what it
killed.
is.
Yeah.
She got murdered, shot, right?
Brutally.
17 years old, baby, teen, right? And so oftentimes in the Black trans community, as particularly Black trans women, we don't even hit the age 35. It is a blessing to hit 35. Then we have Florida, right? I think her name is
B Love.
B Love. Yeah, B Love. Right? 23. The way she got murdered is insane.
Is that the one who got tied up? And
Burned
Yeah.
till she was unreckonable. Like no one could recognizable, right? So there is something within our community that we're not having conversation about how we protect all women, particularly all Black women.
Or the men.
Cis
I
and
mean,
trans.
because let me
And
tell you
cis and
something.
trans,
Like,
right.
I have felt vilification. I felt a lot of love, so I just want to acknowledge that. But, there's been a few times in my career where my public life, where a personal choice, whether it's dating a white woman, whether it's choosing a character in a show, whether it's, getting let go of a show like an Empire where there's rumors that I was, crackhead, it's very painful when you sit in this eye of the storm and people come for you. And when you talk about the Black women, I'm talking about Black men, like my fraternity, well, my former fraternity, I'm gonna blow them up right now. Phi Beta Sigma, we had an executive director that was murdered like that young woman you're talking about. He was gay. He was running for public office in Louisiana. Because we don't have a culture, even within an organization like Phi Beta Sigma, that slogan is culture for service and service for humanity. You have a gay leader who has to then go and live in the shadows, make poor choices based on that. And he was murdered like that young woman. No one stepped up.
His brother.
And as brothers. And so as I've gone through my storm recently, those brothers didn't step up for me. They stepped away. And so and they publicly acknowledged that.
Or they said something publicly? I didn't see
They
that.
did. They went public. And they said,
We're talking about the brother organization to the sorority that also talked about defining black womanhood as only
But let me say
belonging to
this though,
cis women.
because some brothers in the organization have hit me up and said, yo, that is a travesty because within the leadership of this organization right now, there's inappropriate behavior. And I'm not trying to blow anybody up, but
hypocritical, not inappropriate.
This is what hypocritical, right? And so at what point do we get really comfortable being uncomfortable? That's right. So that we can make everybody comfortable.
And we can all get free.
Because I had the same conversation. I was telling you, we're going to be in D.C. at the Congressional Black Caucus this week. I was on the phone a couple of days ago with Congresswoman. I love her, Frederica Wilson. She's like a mom to me. And she read some stuff online, and I had to clear it up for her. And she said, baby, you going to come to the town hall this week? I said, yes, I'm coming to the town hall because I have to. We have to continue this work. And it's not just about the conversation. So when I'm talking about it from a political perspective, we're sitting with our elected officials and saying, what resources do you have in place, or what policy are you putting in place to protect these babies?
The most vulnerable.
Malik, a lot of brothers in New York, I heard it this week, they was like, we always knew Malik was into, trans women? Trans-attracted.
Right.
Trans-attractive. And they was
that's because so were they. That's how they know.
And they was like, no big deal.
That part. You missed that part.
And they was like, no big deal.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, whether people know or not, I mean, it doesn't. It's what does that mean? It means that I love women. Yeah, everyone knows Malik Yoba loves women. Malik has had a lot of women. I love women. Period. In the story. But even beyond that, I love people. I love humanity. I love to have an abundant life. And one of the things that I feel my purpose in life is this is how we can all have an abundant life. Abundance of information, abundance of resources, abundance of opportunity, abundance of friends. Why do we have to live in a world of lack?
Yeah.
We live in a world of lack.
Scarcity.
Where people, scarcity. I can't do this. You can't do that. You're not allowed to do this. Why are you saying this? And I'm saying that is not the only existence that we can live.
And related to that, Charlamagne, I know I am trying to hold space for people that don't want to care. But two things are sitting with me now. I have a sister who's a ordained minister in Houston, who when she read the story, she hit me up and said, if you're ever in space with Malik Yoba, tell him thank you because I now feel seen.
Wow.
So many of those.
This is a grown woman
you said
who was an ordained time ago there now, which is, right? So again, there are members in the community, black and brown, beautiful, trans women who show up in grace, making space for everybody else, who never get acknowledged. March P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera as examples. She was seen. I have been up here a couple of times. Y'all have invited me into this space. This is September. This is my third year now leading the National Black Justice Coalition. I hope people consider us a resource as they're trying to work through some of this stuff. And I have had friends say to me, David, we don't get this gay shit. We are only interested in even having this conversation because we care about you. We love you.
Wow.
In the last week, I've had no fewer than 5 friends, one of whom I've known for a decade, call me and say, I now have the language to talk about how I feel. Like, this is about...
Because
you made the... I'm sorry, let me finish the sentence, right? Because you offered up the language.
Right.
Because you took up space and said, I am trans-attracted. And it wasn't someone who has been a leader of an LGBTQ organization. It wasn't someone who has been in the front of parades or on shows where that has been centered. It was someone talking about living in their fullness of their truth and being ultimately free.
And I can tell y'all, I feel like the freest nigga in America.
That's good.
Well, that's why most people hate us, to be clear.
Let me tell you something.
That's why most people hate us,
bro.
Yeah.
You know, that was the one secret in my life. The one. That was it. No other shady nonsense. That was it.
That's not even shady.
No. Right. I'm saying, in addition to that, there was no other. So what I'm saying is that to walk into a space like my boy Anthony Hemingway's party or wedding last week, where you walk into a room with black folk and you know everybody knows. See, when you walk in the world with a lot of love that comes your way, I don't say I take it for granted, but it's been more than half of my life that I can't walk down the street without people saying, you know, I really appreciate what you do in the world, right? But when you walk among your own people and you know that they have a question about your integrity, and everyone's giving you the side eye, the people that used to give you the love, that's a very interesting feeling. And one of the things that I've learned in my own public persecution and vilification is no matter how bad it was for me with people talking shit, it ain't as bad as it is for y'all.
That.
Yeah,
And so I've had a revelation. And my revelation the last week was, if you are choosing to stand with this community that is marginalized, ostracized, vilified, denied, then you need to know what that feels like.
And you'll never
because
feel it as
as
bad
a black
as they
man
do.
in America, I haven't had to,
Not even a
I don't
taste.
get a lot of the like, it's hard being black in America as a black man.
No, we definitely get oppressed and marginalized.
He said
But
he
that's
personally-
what that's
Personally, as
but that's
I've moved through this world, yes, I've gotten beaten up by 4 white cops in New York when I was 20 years old, but I also was working with the City Kids Foundation. I took it up with Lee Brown, who was the police commissioner. I said, here's my pain. I'm turning to purpose. Lee Brown, what do I need to do for young black men in this city that are getting beaten up by 4 white cops? Look, I was sexually abused as a kid at 7, at 13. I was shot at 15. We talk about trauma.
Trauma, Lord have
You
mercy.
talk about trauma. I was kicked out the house at 16 with $12 in my pocket, a BMX bike, a guitar in my backpack. And I'm here today to tell you that if we get our minds right, if we understand where abundance really lies, abundance is all around us. How many drops of water in that ocean? How many grains of sand on that beach? You cannot count it. And so when we go through trauma and we have these heinous experiences as children, we have a couple of choices. Either we could fold under that pressure, or we can get our mind right. We can lean in. We can learn some things about how is it that you process this information, this trauma. How do you turn that pain or that poison into purpose? How do you take those lemons and turn them into lemonade and quench everybody's thirst?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Malik.
And that's what this is about.
Okay, correct me if I'm wrong. They said you told the general public before you told your kids.
That is not true.
Okay.
That is not true. And this is what I'm saying about black folk on media. There was nothing to tell. Tell what? What was I telling?
But your kids were getting problems now after this, like in school.
Yeah, I think the mother of your child is the one who put that out there.
Who?
Was it the mother of your children?
Who was that?
I don't know her name.
I don't know either.
Oh.
I don't know who. I have no idea why or what that was about.
But how are your kids now? Because we heard that they were getting attacked on social media.
They were. You know what? I was going to bring my 18-year-old here today. I let her stay in bed because that child is one of the most wise people I know. And I said, you know what? We're going to start posting stuff together because the world needs to hear from you, little lady.
Listen to the babies.
Excuse me?
Listen to the baby.
Listen, she's 18, bro. And I'm like, Dina Yoba has more wisdom in that 18, and all of my kids, Josiah, Priya, they're all incredibly gifted kids. But to hear her talk about her perspective, she's basically like, people need to get over it. Humans are humans. She said, I don't know why y'all adults are tripping. For our generation,
which is where most kids are, so we're clear.
They're
like, why don't y'all get it together?
A lot of kids get it.
Yeah, they just didn't appreciate people like, and my siblings. I want to give a shout out to my siblings because they got people. No, people attack them
like this nigga.
Don't interrupt me.
But you know what? I will say this. I have seen.
I know from my faces. So I'm like, I'm trying to relax my face.
That's how Anthony feels.
I would get attacked every day. But I will tell you this. I have seen women who are trans women get attacked for dating a man, and then it comes out that he's dating a trans woman, and then somehow the woman is the one that's being attacked for dating somebody. Like, oh, she outed him. How dare she? Like, I've seen that happen time and time again on, on social media, and I think that's crazy. Like, just because you're dating somebody, and
but that's a huge conversation about what women do to women. Period. It's almost like women often fighting women. So it's like it's a conversation that us as sisters have to heal from.
Angelica Ross.
Sorry.
I thought she paused and she was taking a break.
Nah.
Go ahead.
Carmen Ben said, "Fuck it."
Yeah, right.
Go ahead.
Finish
your point.
I was like,
Finish your point, Nala.
Let
I gotta go through the whole time.
And Nala, let me
Finish
say
your
what
point,
she has.
Nala.
What you guys
I'm sorry,
say?
sis.
And I was gonna say also.
No, finish your point. I'll cut you off.
I don't even know what I was gonna say at this point.
I was
I'm
gonna
sorry,
say,
come
in
back.
closing, talking to people that are listening, what would you say to people out there that's listening that maybe don't know, that's trying to get more communication so they understand? Or even for myself, like I got 5 kids, so I want to be able to talk to them so they don't grow up like our generation did and just talk stupid
That's
so
the
they
goal.
understand. That's why the best thing about this conversation is when I go home, I can have this conversation with my kids so they understand.
Right. Wow, that's a huge question.
Ladies,
I would say just drop the shit, let people be who they are, and like listen, the way that I think about
That's what I'm
this
saying.
is that we
Period.
are all floating on this
That's what he's saying.
ball in the middle of space, and we're all here for such a short period of time. Can we just all get along and like just really discover who we are, because there's so much depth that we are choosing not to acknowledge because we're so stuck on everyone being the same or following the same belief system or just looking to assimilate with people that we really don't even like. And when are we going to stop doing that? You know what I'm saying? Like that for me is just like, I'm only here for a little bit of time, and I want to love as many people as I can love. Yeah. I don't want to feel like I'm not allowed to love you. I'm not allowed to go to this place or go to that place or, say hi to you or look you in the eyes or whatever. I don't want to feel that. And I don't need to feel like I just don't belong, period. Life is too short, you know?
All right.
For yourself?
And also, I want to just
cut you off. He just cut you off.
No,
I know.
I'm saying, go ahead now.
No, I know what I'm gonna say. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I want to apologize to the trans community for any unintentional trauma we may
we've
have caused them
Absolutely.
by our
hold on.
What
Come on,
about
that
these
deserves-
ignorance.
that-
He never apologized for anything.
That's
Not true. I do apologize if
moment.
I'm wrong. I don't want to hurt people intentionally.
And that-
Now you know, because
Which is important.
I'm
It's one of the first
I'm
steps.
community, so like, thank you for apologizing and moving forward. I think what intentional like apology looks like is like practice. Like that looks even much better. Like, what are y'all all committed in this studio doing forward to actually capturing those voices? Because the positive side is that trans people have been contributing to the Black community.
Always.
We got 2 Black trans politicians right now who are in office, who are supporting bills to make sure that all Black people are free. Right? We got models, we got pose, actors, producers, right? So
Teachers,
we've all
policymakers,
right. And so
everybody.
like us being trans does not mean we give up our Black card, as Monica Roberts would say.
Right.
We don't give up our Black cards, right? Like we're still Black, and our experience, just like you have a lived experience that may be different from mine, but we also have shared experience because of our Blackness.
And the "and" part is important, and this conversation is important because there are spaces where we don't have access to the same rights and privileges as everybody else.
And I think that's part of it. Like we said, part of it is having this space so we can have these conversations.
Yeah.
And just like anybody else, like if we say something foul or we say something wrong, call us and check us.
And I think it's important to educate yourself,
I'm sure
too.
David has done it, and Malik can do that with us, and you can do this as well. Like the same thing. Like the whole thing is we have to be here together.
I know.
No,
Yeah, and also too, I just want to say, like, you guys are like, you, people listen to you. All people listen to you.
Yes.
All people listen to the radio. All people listen to music. All
Around
people
the
go to the
world.
movies. All people. So us as entertainers should be more educated on who we're speaking to. Because as a trans person listening to the radio or listening to even 50 Cent, like I love 50 Cent's music, but I don't like what he has to say about people like myself, and the fact that he doesn't even care
Right, that's
to
a problem.
clarify
Yeah.
maybe is the reason why nobody listens to his music anymore. I don't know, and I don't want to be shady or mean or anything, but
No, just speak
it's
facts.
it's like we are artists creating something for people to listen to or to appreciate and to love, and you have to take into consideration every person on this planet, because you don't know necessarily who you're speaking to.
That's a
And it's
fact.
connected to lives, right? Like, like understanding, like literally, like your voice is connected to someone living because you have that platform, right? Like, so if you're saying like, and we're not gonna harp on it, but by saying that y'all don't care or whatever case may be, wherever around like the media is, that it's connected to how someone's gonna show up around a trans woman when we're having like a 17-year-old being shot.
Right.
And let's not just let's the trans men too.
Yeah.
I just was asked by the Trans Men of Excellence to join their board. I just said yes. I don't even know what the requirements are. No, really,
You should look
because
into
it just
that.
it was
Doing this,
it
doing
was
stuff like
no,
that.
it was
Yeah.
important to me because I feel like a lot of trans men are left out of this conversation.
and we haven't said
And
much about
we don't talk
gender-binary
about
people.
that or gender binary people or any of that stuff. And it's
Non-binary.
so anyway.
But
I just
I-
thank y'all for giving.
Yeah, I think
the
it's important.
moment.
And
Yeah.
I do want to say that it is important for us to educate ourselves, too, because we do have a platform. So when we have these discussions, it's not always okay to just be like, well, I don't know, because there's definitely ways that you can do your research and find out people's experiences and find out the right terminology that you should be using and look those things up so that we're not just blind when we have certain
And
things
we, the global, we
happening.
also have to give grace, right? Like this stuff
That's
is
right.
not easy. The Latin root of the word education is educare. It means to draw out. This process of learning and being challenged and trying new things and adopting new language is difficult. And people are going to make mistakes. And so
Right.
it's incumbent upon us, again, acknowledging the collective trauma that we've experienced as a result of transatlantic enslavement, white supremacy, and anti-blackness, and all this other shit that we're mired in, to give each other grace.
Right.
Well, we
And I don't
appreciate
think
you
people
guys
giving
for
up
joining
that
us.
coming out lingo only because that Diana Ross song's so fire, bro. Like, come on, David.
All right.
Like, come
So
on.
me and Lil Nas X gonna do a song about inviting in, and that shit's gonna
You
ride.
might
Somebody,
have to.
Lil Nas
That's
X,
right.
holler at your boy.
Yo,
Let's
yo,
make this
yo,
happen.
bro.
This is my final thought. And just, someone just said this to me the other
But
day.
see, white people love gay people's products. This is like, see, the contradiction
I love
for me
gay-
about.
listen, I love
no,
gay-
see,
black
people
gay
love
men.
and celebrate the things that gay people do, but then want to demonize us and talk shit
Facts.
about
Listen,
it.
I love
In the
black
same
gay
way
men.
that like white people will adopt, rape, be profited off of our culture, and then don't
box
want anything to
braids
do with
and all
black
that
people.
stuff.
And then cis hetero black folks don't understand how the two are connected.
I love black
There's
gay men.
parallel.
I just,
We know.
they're hilarious. They're smart. I just do. I don't know what to tell you.
I think they're all different. It's not a
And I'm,
Right.
and I'm also a little confused because a lot of them call me sis. So I don't know if it's because of cisgender.
No,
or,
sissy. They call you sissy. That's short
No,
for
that's
sissy.
not right. No, that's got to be a slur. Don't stick up for me. Don't let him talk to me like that.
It is. No one is. Well, actually, we at some point we got to talk about that too, right? In the same way, black queer men, same gender loving men, men who have sex with men, whatever, can't stand in the space of demanding to be respected in our identity, and then misgender straight brothers.
Or
Right.
hate on trans women, which is a whole other story.
Oh, yeah,
about
nah,
just
we're
that.
not ready to go
But I
there.
want to say this: for a lot of women have been hitting me up saying, "Malik, so if you like trans women or you're attracted to trans women, does that make you? They're men, right? They love to say, but they're men.
Wrong.
So someone said to me, if that is true, so for all of you cisgender women, naturally born women who think that trans women
A sign, not
I'm a-
naturally
I'm a-
born.
I'm a
Again,
challenge you.
Okay,
not naturally
switch out.
born.
Get it,
There's
'cause
nothing
listen,
about it is
I told you I
natural.
make mistakes.
Nothing,
Look,
again,
you gonna teach
nothing
me.
about that is natural.
Okay, so what I'm saying is for women, what's the
let you
language?
handle
I
it,
should say?
brother.
Assigned
Sign.
female at birth,
Okay, so for women who are assigned female at birth and stick to that,
and for whom that is
designation.
consistent with how they identify.
and who for whom that's a lot of words. Who
Stick with it.
Okay.
You are in a commitment for a stance. So
Yes,
Do the
ma'am.
work.
Yes, ma'am.
Do
Here
the
we go.
work.
Come on.
Teach me. Say it again.
Do the work.
Do it again.
For whom
For whom?
is consistent with how they identify.
Okay, so for women who were assigned female at birth and is consistent with how they identify.
That's right.
Right?
So for those women who question and say that trans women are men, the question I then have for you, if they are men, would you sleep with them? Mic drop.
Wouldn't that make you a lesbian though?
No, that's the question. Because they say,
Yeah,
no, that's
he's
a man.
pointing out the contradiction in the term.
If she's saying, if someone's looking at
Mm-hmm.
you women and saying, you're
Then
a
you
man.
would like
so the
men.
question is,
Gotcha,
if
gotcha.
they are men, would a cisgender
But that's
woman
why. But
sleep
that's
with
why
them?
I say like the distinction between gender identity and sexual orientation. Because if a woman identifies as a lesbian,
Or
then
bi.
yeah, she
Yeah.
would. Or
Yeah.
right.
bisexual,
It is
she
possible.
would.
It is
Yeah.
possible.
Right.
Like
It's
I
not that-
said,
yeah, some
I
of
don't
the
have to
stuff is more
deceive anyone to
complicated.
get. I get numbers from men, women, all over across the identity spectrum, and it's up to
Right.
me to say, yeah, I'm feeling you. I want to get to know you.
Right.
Are we getting a little too deep? We was trying to keep it trans talk for dummies 101.
Right.
All right.
So the
Getting a little-
closest
confused?
way,
I lost you?
For
You get a little too
folks
deep.
who are lost, the closest thing to this, we talked about media. Media is important. We talked about polls. Shout out to Angelica Ross and all the stuff they've been doing. There's an episode of a Netflix show that the first season of it has Anthony Mackie and his black male best friend. It's the
Styling
European
Hollywood.
show that takes on technology.
Oh, Black Mirror.
Black Mirror.
Striking Vipers.
That's exactly right. So Striking Vipers, the episode shows two cisgendered heterosexual black men. Anthony
That was
Mackie's
wild.
married. His best friend is into women, has enjoyed women. And the two of them play a virtual reality game where they show up in a virtual reality world much like Street Fighter, where Anthony Mackie shows up looking like Ken
yeah.
or Ryu, and his friend, whose name escapes me, but he phenomenally acted, Part shows up looking like Chung Lee. And the two of them in this virtual space engage in a cisgendered heterosexual relationship in virtual reality. But they're two straight black men in real life. What do you call them?
Video game players. That's what I took. I was just like, they play too
You
many
gonna go to
video
the
games.
lowest common denominator.
No,
with
but
with
I
regard
thought-
to their sexual identity, because Anthony Mackie is
Yes.
married and he and his wife work through some stuff. She also has relationships and intimacy questions that come up. But some of this is about like, what would happen if we just got beyond the need to cling on to these terms?
Is that sexually fluid?
But did they
Possibly.
but David, they met
Possibly.
up. They did meet up to see if something was there between them, and there was
They
nothing
met
there.
up but they were also meeting in a space where the two of them were dealing with trauma, previous existing relationships, not having language.
True.
Anthony Mackie didn't show up in a space where he was not free and encumbered from all the stuff that was going on in his life.
Got you.
And so again, some of this is about people being able to deal with the trauma, not having to deal with shame and stigma so that they can get free to the point where they can show up authentically in love. This is no different than two straight black people in a toxic relationship. Messing with each other, not showing up and honoring each other in ways that they should. Some of this is just about us interrogating things a little bit more. Some of this is about adopting language so we can make space for people. But at its core, it's really about humanity and asking better questions.
Right.
Well, we appreciate you guys for joining us.
And let's
thank
just
you.
say we
we
care
learned a
from
lot.
now on instead of we just don't care.
Yeah.
We care.
And don't forget.
I'm gonna say what
we can
Carmen
get to the
said.
point of
Let people
wanting
love
not
who
to
they
care,
love.
but acknowledge it as well, right? Like I don't care who you sleep with
There you
because I
go.
honor you as a person
That's
fully
it.
without
I
an
care about you as a
explanation or
human
apology.
being.
That's all. That's what I be saying.
Tell the whole
And
make
don't
the whole
forget,
statement.
September 28th is the Trans Visibility March. So
On DC.
on DC.
And
so
on
we
the
need,
27th, we're doing our workshop, Love and Trauma.
So we need all the
And
support.
October 8th, there's a Supreme Court rally around Title VII. There's a piece of legislation that, again, would allow employers to be able to fire trans folks or people they think are trans and others without impunity.
Where's that rally?
In Washington, D.C., in
Oh,
front of the
DC as
Supreme
well.
Court.
So the
We'll have
march
more
is to
information
change
on
legislation.
NBJC.org.
Yes, it's
Okay.
about the policy. It's really about the policy and rights. And obviously, we have a huge election
The
coming up
Equality
next year, and we have an administration that doesn't give to
About anybody.
Exactly.
Poor
And
white people
everything will be on
included.
National Black Justice Coalition page,
Website. Yep.
website. Okay.
NBJC.org and NBJC on the move across digital platforms.
Well, thank you
for that.
guys so much again.
Thank you.
And we're gonna leave this this place open for you guys. So whenever you guys want to come up here, please.
David,
do.
my guy, man.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yep. I appreciate y'all
Thank
making
Dave's
you
been
all.
up here
space
so
to
many
follow
times,
through.
Malik as well, and you guys are invited as well.
Carmen,
And
Nala,
Jesus for
don't say
life.
you guys.
Jesus for life.
Yeah,
You're
Jesus
right.
for
Lives
life.
matter.
Everybody, you guys. I said,
But it's pejorative. He's so again, this stuff comes. You better teach, right? But when we say God,
You ain't pay attention to
when we
nothing
say
about
guys, we're
that.
privileged.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Malik.
Yo, it's beautiful. Thank you.
All
Thank
right,
you,
it's the Breakfast
everybody.
Club. Good morning.
Awesome.